So, what are some of the hardest spiritual principles to accept when creating money in one's life?
I think the hardest ones that I've found for people to accept is firstly that you're always fairly compensated. Now, why do I say that? Because when I say when you're always fairly compensated, people go, no, that's not true. I'm working so much harder. I should be making more money.
Right.
I should have more money. Why am I not making more money? And what I have learned to recognize is that you may be working really, really hard, but what you're working on, how you're working on it, is what really determines how much you will actually make. And universe will always reward you very fairly, very fairly. Even if you think, no, but Ajit, I've been doing 12-hour days, 15-hour days, it doesn't, all work is not equal. All skill is not equal. And you need to learn how to work with that energy to be able to be rewarded more. There's a little caveat of a story that I want to share to kind of make, to help understand what does that even mean and how does it really implement in somebody's life. So there was a time in my life where I had decided that I want to be the CEO of Mindvalley. I said, you know what, I was about maybe 28 or something. I was a kid in the company who had joined maybe 3 years ago at that time. And we do this wonderful thing called the 3 most important questions, where we answer questions like contribution, experiences, and opportunities that one person would like. And one of the things that I was like, what I really want to have an opportunity or an experience in my life was to be the CEO of a company that I really love and appreciate. And that was Mindvalley at the time. I was working for the company. And so I wrote that down, my 3 most important questions. What it did was it created a gap in my practical life, because in my practical life, I recognized that to be the CEO of Mindvalley, or to be the CEO of any company really, you have to ask yourself, why should you be rewarded that position, right? And that brings you the awareness of that you are always rewarded where you are right now. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
All right?
Yeah, but say more.
And at the same time, what you do is you go, okay, if I want to be rewarded like a CEO of a company, I must become the CEO before I will be rewarded.
So this is about really embodying the person that you want to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
You need to feel that feeling. You need to take the actions. You need to behave as if you were in a position of CEO of a company, let's say hypothetically in this scenario, right? And what it did for me is, because I had that gap, I recognized to be the CEO of any company, you must have an understanding of the entirety of the organization, because you'll be in charge of the entirety of the organization. You cannot be a specialized person in a small field and hope that I should be rewarded like a CEO. You won't be, because you are not qualified for it. You haven't done the effort, work, and energetic movement to be able to recognize yourself to that position. And so with that understanding, I said, okay, so that means I must do everything that a CEO must be able to do, right? And that was firstly to fully understand the organization. And that made me very interested in all the other dimensions of the organization without any expectation that it will take me 3 years or 30 years to become the CEO of the company. I didn't have a time expectation. I had the expectation or want, not even expectation, it was a want of wanting this experience for myself to run a company that I really, really admire. And so for the next 2-3 years, what I would end up doing is every 6 months, every 8 months, or every 12 months or so, depending on which title it was, I would hop between different roles in the company. I would go in and I would say, seems like there are a lot of things broken in technology. Can I go fix it? Now, I was not a technological person, but I had a great management skill. I could talk to anyone and really rile up a team behind it while I didn't understand any code. But I didn't need to understand code. What I needed to understand was to build relationships with people that otherwise knew I don't know anything about their work. But all I did was to manage their schedule and to become the defender of their schedule and make sure that they had the capacity to deliver, right? Then I took the role of the launch manager, the chief marketing officer, the chief operating officer. And eventually, when it came time to choose a CEO, guess who was the obvious choice?
You.
Right, because I understood everything.
Yeah.
And I knew, and I was already operating kind of like the CEO even before I had the title of CEO. And so the interesting point, or the curiosity one must have, is if I'm being compensated anything, it is probably a fair compensation. It also does one more thing. You stop to hate everything around you, which is probably more important than anything, because lack never creates abundance.
Right.
Right? The moment you go, you know what, I'm not being paid enough for this. You've already created a lack in your field. You operate from that lack. If you operate from that lack, your consciousness, your vibration is going to be of lack, and you can't attract abundance from lack.
So what do you do if you're not being fairly compensated? How do you
You're
go?
always fairly compensated.
Okay, so it's the belief that I am always fairly compensated.
You're all from a universal point of view.
Okay.
From a universal spiritual point of view, you're always fairly compensated. If you're saying my manager is a dick and that's why I'm not fairly compensated, apply for another job. It's very simple. And you will know in about 5 minutes or about 5 applications down that if you're fairly compensated or not. It's very simple.
Yeah.
Let's say, for example, you go, you know what, this is not enough. All right, go try another job. Apply for it. Apply for 5 of them. And if all of them are about paying you the same amount of money or are not willing to pay you anything more than what you're being compensated right now, you're being fairly compensated. It's not your manager, it's you.
Yeah.
See, the point really of a lot of spiritual principles is to come to awareness that you are at the place in time that you don't have to subject yourself to psychological torture because of the stories you tell yourself. That's the point of spirituality a little bit, is that you can lean into something that is greater than your mind, right? Because you're always psychologically torturing yourself if you really think about yourself.
Yeah.
Like if you tell yourself a story, like for example, somebody telling themselves, what if I'm really not being fairly compensated? Well, go check it out. Most individuals won't check it out and keep complaining about they're not being fairly compensated. And isn't that true?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if that is true, what is really happening? You're just psychologically torturing yourself and thinking universe doesn't have your back. Neither of those beliefs is helping you create more abundance for yourself.
Yeah.
Right? It's same for love. It's same for anything. Any abundance that you seek, it always must come from a place of acceptance. Because once you accept, you can create movement. Believing and understanding that the universe will always fairly compensate you is something that allows you to create movement in your life. Here's another thing to think, another kind of thought experiment, right? Mm-hmm. The moment you recognize that, I am fairly compensated, right? You would start to ask, what do I need to do so I am compensated what I want to get compensated?
Well, that's a great question.
Right?
Yeah.
So because you go, okay, I'm fairly compensated. This is what I'm probably meant to be getting right now. What do I need to do? Now you're curious. You are not, again, going back into lack and questioning where you are, versus you're saying, how can I stay into action? Because that's where creation happens, when you're in action. Not when you're questioning your actions, when you're questioning things around you. When you're in movement and in action is when you get to create. So that's why you're always fairly compensated. It's a hard pill to swallow, I know. Anybody who's listening is like, what are you talking about, bro? Like, I work so hard, I do many hours, and I totally recognize that. But that's not compensation is not a function of hard work. Compensation is a function of skill.